Coming up, as the Tories' love affair with the Union Jack becomes ever more obsessive, is it just a distraction from their pandemic failures and increasingly obvious corruption? Or is it all part and parcel of the government's authoritarian agenda? Spoiler alert, it's both. But first, before we get into it, please hit the like button, subscribe and get notified of new videos every week. Authoritarian government can be characterised by restrictions on individual freedoms, the use of patriotism to advance the power of the state or corporations over the rights of the individual, the suppression of free and fair elections, and control of the media. Is this ringing any bells yet? Let's dive deeper. First of all, restrictions on individual freedoms. We can't go any further, I'm afraid, without mentioning the B word. Brexit represented a massive removal of personal freedoms for all of us. The freedom to live, work, love and retire in 27 other countries, which was taken away overnight after roughly a third of those eligible to vote actually voted for it. But that aside, the hot topic right now related to individual freedoms is the government's police, crime, sentencing and courts bill. When this bill is passed, any protest could be banned if a bystander suffers what the bill defines as serious distress, serious annoyance, serious inconvenience or serious loss of amenity. The penalty will be up to 10 years in prison and/or a fine. This bill will allow the police to impose restrictions on protests simply if they are noisy or likely to cause serious annoyance to the public, and gives the Home Secretary the sole power to decide this without having to consult Parliament. And just a reminder, the Home Secretary currently is Priti Vacant Patel. Sorry, an old Sex Pistols reference there, showing my age. But would you really want Priti Patel to have absolute power to be able to criminalise a protest? If your answer to that is, doesn't bother me, Rob, I trust the Tories, well, just stop for a moment and consider if Labour won the next election. This bill would give the next Labour Home Secretary the same power. How would a Brexiteer like the thought of Rachel Reeves, David Lammy or Zara Sultana deciding one of their flag-shagging Protect the Statues protests was criminal or not? It's a really bad bill for anybody, of any political persuasion. Yet the Conservatives' libertarian wing has been curiously quiet on this. It's all about freedom of speech, until it's the Tories that want to take it away. Look, by their very nature, protests are supposed to be disruptive. They're meant to annoy people. They're there to shake people out of their day-to-day routine, make them think. And throughout history, attempts to ban peaceful protests have just escalated things and led to more trouble and violence than if they'd just been allowed to take place. Look at the disastrous recent results of the policing of the peaceful Sarah Everard vigil on Clapham Common. Peaceful until the Met Police tried to break it up, that is. And the Kill the Bill protests in Bristol, which have started out peacefully each time until the police showed up, attacking not just the protesters, but also journalists recording events. The second aspect of authoritarian government is patriotism. The government has recently issued instructions that all government buildings in Britain must normally display the Union flag every day. Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden says people expected it to be flown and that public buildings must display it with pride. So I guess if they display it without pride, they may be prosecuted. Not sure how that's going to work. I'm sure Dowden and all the other dimwits in Cabinet are making these ridiculous statements just to distract from corruption revelations, the crash in exports post-Brexit, and the spaffing of £37 billion of our money on Dido Harding's failed track and trace system. A third indicator of authoritarian government is a restriction on democratic voting. And in the UK, to be fair, any government gets a head start on this one due to our antiquated and unfair first-past-the-post system, which favours the largest two parties every time. Our Parliament is not representative of how the electorate votes. In 2019, the Tories won a landslide 80-seat majority in Parliament despite winning only 43.6% of the vote. In the 2017 election, Labour under Jeremy Corbyn had come within just 2% of Theresa May's Tories, which terrified the establishment. A socialist almost came into power. That's why the Tory manifesto in 2019 pledged to impose voter ID, despite there only being 4 voter fraud convictions in the last 2 general elections combined. Around 3.5 million voters in Britain do not have photo ID. And if you think about it, passports and driving licences are only relevant for people who can afford to travel or to be able to drive. Most of those without passports or driving licences are disproportionately poor, working class, the young, those living on state pensions and/or from minority backgrounds. All of those groups skew against the Tories in elections. Donald Trump's Republican Party have used voter ID in America for many years, and he even admitted in 2020 that without such voter suppression tools, you'd never have a Republican elected again. And a final feature of authoritarian government is control of the media. The UK's press is probably the most partisan in the Western world, with the mainstream press, with the exception of The Guardian, owned or controlled by large shareholders, often based overseas, and usually with a political interest in persuading their readers to vote Conservative, other than the Labour-supporting Mirror. Until recently, the broadcast media, BBC, ITV, Sky TV, etc., have been nominally neutral in their news reporting, but now we see partisan news channels like the extreme right-wing GB News being licensed for broadcast by this government. And the BBC has undeniably shifted to a pro-government stance in recent times. Not surprising, since the political appointments of ex-Tory councillor Tim Davie as BBC Director General and a new chairperson, Richard Sharp, who has donated £416,000 to the Tories, directed the right-wing Centre for Policy Studies, and spent 2 decades with the US banking giant Goldman Sachs working alongside Rishi Sunak. Within weeks of Sharp's appointment, Nish Kumar's ratings-topping comedy show The MASH Report has been cancelled due to the show's anti-government bias. And the final nail in the coffin for a media that might hold this appalling government to account is the appointment of long-time editor of the hate-filled Daily Mail, Paul Dacre, to run the state media regulator, Ofcom. Welcome to authoritarian Britain.